Welcome aboard Just Jets with your captain, Matt O'Leary. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
Hey, what's going on? I'm Matt O'Leary, back with another episode of Just Jets. I hope you are excited because today, well, it's going to be free agent heavy. We are going to do the questions at the end like every week. No interview. I just really wanted to go through and talk about the different free agent options, who the Jets should bring back. We're going to start with the New York Jets free agents and then get into guys on the open market because today is really the day. It's essentially Christmas morning for football fans. I know there's a lot of fun stuff throughout the year. For instance, opening day is always fun. The first week one, there's a lot of really good stuff, the draft, but the first day of free agency, and I know it's technically not the first day of free agency, but the legal tampering period, a lot of fun stuff going to go down today. We're going to find out a lot of information later on. This is dropping in the morning, obviously. Hopefully you listen to this before the legal tampering period begins at 12 p.m. Eastern time today. And oh boy, it's going to be a fun one. Also wanted to mention that I will be live streaming during the legal tampering period. So wherever you are feel most comfortable, whether it's on YouTube at Matt O'Leary NY, I'll be on Facebook Live and Periscope on Twitter, so wherever you want, at Matt O'Leary NY. I think Twitch, too, even. We'll see. No matter what, you're going to be able to find it somewhere. I'm just going to be hanging out, watching pretty much NFL Network, following along on Twitter, and just reacting to the big signings throughout the day. And, I mean, everyone's going to be home. It's crazy times with this coronavirus thing. It's really scary. I hope you guys are staying safe out there. It's something that should be taken seriously, so you're probably home. You're probably either working from home or off from school, whatever the case may be. I'm going to be here. I'm going to be live streaming, and it's going to be a ton of fun. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Like I said, I want to start with the New York Jets and who they have hitting the market and who I would like the Jets to bring back. So a lot of this episode is going to just be going through names and saying if I would want them or not and why. So let's start with Robbie. He is someone who I've talked a lot about, Robbie Anderson, that is. Of course, wide receiver for the New York Jets. His best year was in 2017 where he had over 900 receiving yards. He had in the 700s each of the last 2 years, 5 touchdowns this year, 6 last year. But something that you got to keep in mind, and I know I've said it a million times with Robbie Anderson, and I probably sound like a broken record, but he has not played with a healthy quarterback at any point in his career. We're throwing 2016 out the window because that was a lost season, but I'm talking 2017, 18, 19. 13 games he had with Josh McCown and had over 900 receiving yards. That's a really solid season. In those other 3 games, he got Bryce Petty. We know how bad Bryce Petty was. The production wasn't there, and that's what cost him a 1,000-yard season. In 2018, Sam Darnold missed 3 games in the middle of the season, and he got a much worse version of Josh McCown. Now, I know what you're saying. Well, how could you count McCown in 2017 and not 2018? Well, the 2017 version of McCown and the 2018 version of McCown were 2 totally different beings. If you watch the games, you would know that it's not the same. And if Sam was healthy, does he reach 1,000 yards? That might be a little bit of a stretch, but I would say he gets over 900 for sure. And then this past year, he had essentially 800 receiving yards, and that is 3 games without Sam Darnold. And in the week 1, he had a Sam Darnold who pretty much was playing through mono. So he basically had a healthy quarterback for 12 games, and he was still able to get 800 receiving yards, essentially 800 receiving. I think it was like 778 or something like that. Nonetheless, he is one of the most effective deep threats in the game. He's still young, and he is just entering his prime now. He is absolutely someone that I want to bring back. That was a long-winded way to say, yes, I want to bring him back. But yeah, I'm bringing Robbie Anderson back. I think his contract, I don't know if it's going to get into the $14-15 million range. I think if you're thinking it's going to be around $10 million, you're probably on the light side. I'll split the difference and go it's about a $12 million AAV. And for that, yeah, I'm bringing Robbie Anderson back. I really hope the Jets figure something out tomorrow to get that done. But Robbie should be back in green and white. If I was in charge, I'd make sure he was back in green and white. Next up on my list is Jordan Jenkins, who is essentially Calvin Pace light. He is your edge-setting outside linebacker, and a really solid one at that. He usually finds his way to somewhere between 6 and 8 sacks. Again, he's not someone who's coming off the edge with speed. He kind of gets there with coverage sacks and stuff like that. He's a good player. He plays with a high motor and stuff like that. He's an edge setter, like I said. And his market is probably going to be, I'm going to guess, around $10 million to sign him. I really think the Jets bring him back, and I think you would have to address the other side at edge as well and go with someone with a little bit more speed, maybe take a flyer on somebody. More on that later. But I think Jordan Jenkins is coming back, and I would re-sign him too. Value-wise, at $10 million, I'm not sure how great that is, but he is a good player. He is someone who has gotten better every year, so I think I would want to bring him back. One of the best mid-round picks of the Mike Maccagnan era. Then that brings us to Calvin Beachum. Calvin Beachum has been a really solid Jet ever since he's come over in, I think 2017 was his first year, if I'm not mistaken, in the green and white. After the Ryan Clady experiment went terrible in 2016. Anyway, Beachum was really solid for them. When he was healthy on the field last year, he was one of the better offensive linemen that they've had. He is not a phenomenal left tackle. Like, he is probably very okay. He is serviceable. And I think if your plan is to draft a tackle and then sign in free agency an interior offensive lineman, then I am for bringing Calvin Beachum back. I don't want to bring him back long term, so I'm a maybe on Calvin Beachum because I think you could even find an upgrade in a stopgap tackle. So if you're looking at a $7 million AAV contract, I think I'd bring him back on a 1-year deal. Again, I don't want to go anything crazy long, but I'm not opposed to bringing him back. I think is the point that I wanted to get out there when it comes to Calvin Beachum. Next up is Brian Poole, who absolutely should be back. Slot corner. He was replacing Buster Skrine, and Buster Skrine, despite having a pretty solid 2015, really stunk in 16, 17, and pretty much in 2018 as well. Poole was just a better version of what Buster Skrine was supposed to be, and I thought it would be, at minimum, a lateral move, but it was definitely an improvement. Again, probably Mike Maccagnan's better free agent signings. I know I've said that before on this show and on the YouTube channel in the past, but I'm sticking by that. Brian Poole, he's going to get paid, and he deserves it. I think he's going to get close to $10 million a year, which is pretty high for someone who's a slot cornerback, but I think it's worth it for Brian Poole, especially because we saw what he was able to do on that New York Jets team last year and on the defensive side of the ball. So yeah, I'm going to bring Brian Poole back. And that's pretty high up on my priority list. Yeah, you could probably find replacements and upgrades for Calvin Beachum or Jordan Jenkins. I don't know if I really believe that with Robbie Anderson, but Poole is definitely high up there on the list of guys that I'd want to bring back. Next up is Demaryius Thomas, who I want no part of bringing back. Just because I know he was a nice safety blanket, and I'm not saying that he would be your number one target or anything like that, but I just think the Jets could go a different direction here. I don't necessarily want to bring back a veteran who is a shell of his former self. I want to get younger. I want to get faster at the wide receiver position. The league is built around speed. Look at the Kansas City Chiefs, what they do on offense. They're a lot of fun to watch, and I think that would make life a lot easier for Sam Darnold. Yes, Demaryius Thomas is a veteran presence, but he's also an Adam Gase guy, and I know that it's probably actually a positive that because there's very few Adam Gase guys, but I just don't think you're going to be able to recreate 2015, which is what Gase is trying to do here when he had success with his guys like Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, another guy who's going to come up on this list later on. I don't know. I just think you could do a lot better than Demaryius Thomas. I don't think you should make that a priority. I think you could find some other veteran with higher upside or take a swing on a younger player whose ceiling's a little bit higher. I don't think it's something that is going to make all that much of a difference if you bring Demaryius Thomas back. So I'd probably say no to him. Next up on the list is Alex Lewis. I'm saying yes 100%. I'm bringing him back, and I think he's going to be a starter on this offensive line. You could probably get him for something like between $2 and $4 million a year. He's not going to cost you a whole lot. It's impossible to replace all 5 starters on the offensive line. So if you bring back Beachum relatively cheap and Lewis, and then maybe draft a center in the 3rd round and plug him in and maybe have him compete with Jonathan Harrison, and then you sign a guard like Thuney or Glasgow. We'll get to those guys later. And on the right side, you have your 11th overall pick. That seems like something that's a little bit more realistic going into this and saying, well, I want Glasgow, I want Thuney, I want, all the big name offensive linemen. It's just not realistic to do in free agency. So I think you have to bring Lewis back, who was an effective starter. He wasn't phenomenal, but he wasn't the worst piece on that offensive line. And if he's playing on right guard and replacing a guy like Brian Winters, who absolutely stinks and I think should be cut at this point, then I could be for that for sure. Which brings, speaking of offensive line, next guy on this list is Ryan Khalil. We laugh at that. No, you're not bringing Ryan Khalil back. He was terrible for the New York Jets, and they replaced him with Jonathan Harrison. So there, no way, shape, or form Khalil will be playing in 2020 for the New York Jets, or probably for any team. I think he goes back and retires. Neville Hewitt, I'm going to say no to as well. I just think that there's no. You're going to have C.J. Mosley back. That's a ton of money. You already have Williamson back, Avery Williamson, if you decide to keep him around, if you don't cut him, which right now they haven't, so I'm operating under the assumption that he is sticking around. I personally would cut him because it opens up, I think, $6.5 million in cap space, and I think you get by with a Burgess. I think he would be just fine, or a Blake Cashman in that spot. I just don't love allocating a ton of money to the inside linebacker position. I don't know how much value that has. If you want to allocate a ton of money in cornerback or edge on the defense, then yeah, okay, you're not going to get any complaints out of me. But inside linebacker, interior defensive tackle, I don't love it. I that's not how I would spend money in building a roster. And if you already have C.J. Mosley, then I am probably cutting Williamson and saying no to bring back Neville Hewitt. And I'll get by with Burgess on a low-cost deal. And I'll get by with Blake Cashman in that spot. Because, I mean, let's face it, how many interior linebackers do you really need? And then this next duo I'm going to do in a pair, Bilal Powell and Ty Montgomery. If you've been with me for a while and followed along with me on Twitter in the early days, you know I'm one of the biggest Bilal Powell fans. But I think his time as a New York Jet is over. And that makes me really sad because he was completely underutilized in 2019. Go figure. I mean, that's pretty much been the story of his entire Jets career. He was underutilized, but, I mean, just Adam Gase wasn't using Powell or Montgomery, more so Montgomery at all, which shocked me because they had three running backs in Powell, Montgomery, and Bell who could catch the ball out of the backfield, and they almost never had two running backs on the field, which is mind-numbingly dumb. But this isn't about how bad of a coach Adam Gase is. This is about who they are and are not going to bring back in free agency. So I'm going to say probably not on those two, and I think they look in the middle rounds to get a second running back in here behind Le'Veon Bell. I think that's more likely to happen. So that's going to round it out for Jets who are becoming free agents. Beyond that, we can now get into the positions in free agency that I think the Jets are going to look to address, or ones that make sense at least. So what I'm going to talk about is offensive line names. I'm going to go through. I have a bunch. Offensive line, wide receiver, edge, corner. I think those are probably the positions that the Jets are going to look to attack the most. So starting with the O-line, Cordy Glenn, who was just recently cut by the Cincinnati Bengals. Yeah, I would take a flyer on him. Is he my number one choice? No, but I think that he is certainly someone that I would feel comfortable bringing in. Again, when I talked about earlier the stopgap options, that would be it. If you bring in Glenn and then draft somebody at 11th overall, I could be pretty comfortable with that for sure. Next up is Brian Bulaga. He's a right tackle for the Green Bay Packers. I like this move a lot. I would definitely like to bring Bulaga in. I think he's a relatively cheap option for a tackle. I mean, we just saw Catanzaro re-sign, and he's getting $16.5 million a year with the Indianapolis Colts. So what do you think Conklin's going to get? He's going to get $17, $18 million. Thuney's going to get $15 million probably. I think you get Bulaga, who is solid for maybe $10, $11 million a year, and I think that's pretty good value, so yeah, I'd bring him in. Next up on my list is Jason Peters. I know how good he is, but he's 38 years old. How many more years could he keep doing this? I'm going to say no. Even on a stopgap, I can't speak. Even as a stopgap option for the New York Jets, I don't know why that was so hard to get out, but it was. I don't like it. Maybe I had PTSD with Ryan Khalil and just way older veterans, but Peters is going to be a no-go for me. Next up is Jack Conklin. I just mentioned his name. He's someone who's probably going to get $17, $18 million a year. But if you're bringing Jack Conklin in, this all depends on what you do at other positions, but I'm just keeping it as simple as, would I bring this person in, yes or no? Conklin, yeah, for sure. He's a automatic upgrade over Shell or Adoga, whoever you want to say was the right tackle last year. And whoever's there at 11, you draft them and put them on the left side. Your offensive line is significantly better than it was. So I would be okay with them bringing in Conklin for sure. Next up is Joe Thuney, who is someone else I am a huge fan of. He is a guard. Like I said, probably getting $15 million a year. Going to reset the market for sure. Yeah, I would bring him in. I'm going to do a little peek behind the curtain. My plan, I think, if I was trying this, I would go big money for Thuney, bring back Beachum, and draft an offensive lineman at 11. So then my offensive line would essentially be Beachum on the left side. Left guard would be Thuney, who I just brought in. Harrison at center. Right guard would be Alex Lewis on a cheap deal to replace Brian Winters, who you'd cut and save, I think it's $7 or $8 million against the cap. And then right guard is whoever's available at 11, whether it's Becton, Wills, Wirfs, Thomas, who pick one out of a hat, is perfectly fine at right tackle. That would be my plan. Next up on the list is Connor McGovern. He is a center from the Denver Broncos. And yeah, I would definitely look to upgrade at center. He's probably the best center on the market. So sure, I would definitely look at bringing him in. Richie Incognito, I'm going to say no. He's a veteran. He has some question marks around him. I know that's way, way, way in his past, but I'm all set on Richie Incognito. Graham Glasgow, I really like him as a value option. Yes, he's a guard. He is not at the same level as a Thuney, but he's a very good tier B option. He could also play center, which I think makes him a little bit more valuable. You're probably looking at $9 or $10 million a year to bring him in. I would absolutely do it. Andreas Pete, no, too injury prone from the Saints, and Andrew Whitworth is just way too old. No. So that rounds out some guys on the O-line who I think are going to be some names that maybe they're involved with or just who I thought could potentially make sense. So there's some guys in there. Glenn, yeah. Balaga, yes. Conklin, Thuney, McGovern, Glasgow. Those are some names that I'd be comfortable with and happy if the New York Jets sign them tomorrow or legally, whatever the term is for what happens tomorrow. Next up, let's get to the wide receiver position. So I'm going to start with Emmanuel Sanders, who I want absolutely no part of. He is 33 years old. He looked to regress in the second half of last season with the 49ers. I think he's 33. I think I said that. 33 years old. And I just think it would be redundant to bring him in. He's a smaller guy and is better suited in the slot. And you already have Jamison Crowder, who does a really nice job playing the slot receiver for the New York Jets. I think you need a bigger option, and to me that just doesn't make a lot of sense. Next up is Devin Funchess, and I'm going to say no to him as well. He's a guy that I've always felt is overrated. I know he was hurt last year, but I'm really good with Devin Funchess. I don't think the value would be there. No, I wouldn't bring in Devin Funchess if you ask me. Amari Cooper, I'm going to say no, and not because he's not a talented wide receiver. I just don't see paying him $20 million a year, which I think it's going to take $19 or $20 million a year to do that. He's a very good wide receiver, but allocating that kind of cap space, I would rather get by with Anderson at $12 million, which $8 million against the cap is a huge difference, and I'm not quite sure you could convince me that Amari Cooper is $8 million more valuable against the cap than Robbie Anderson. I would take a wide receiver in the second round. There's going to be a lot of good ones available when the Jets are picking at, I believe 48 is their second round pick. I like the slot receiver, and then I think you could get by with maybe a later round wide receiver as wide receiver 4 or Josh Doxson as your 4th receiver, and I think that's pretty good 4 wide receivers right there. And you have Le'Veon Bell who you can line up in the slot, and you have 2 really good tight ends. I think that's plenty for the wide receiver position at that point. So no, he is not someone I would necessarily want to go after. Rashad Perryman is definitely a name I would want to go after. He came on really strong for Tampa Bay down the stretch. He had over 100 yards the last 3 weeks of the year and 4 touchdowns. He is someone who didn't really hit in Baltimore, bounced around, went to Cleveland, but then in Tampa Bay finished really strong down the stretch. He was their 3rd option too. Mike Evans obviously number 1, and then you have Chris Godwin as number 2. But Perryman really came on strong at the end of the year, and he is a big receiver at 6'2", but has a ton of speed, so I think he could be a Robbie Anderson replacement. Even if you bring Robbie back, I wouldn't be opposed to going with Perryman, too. You want to get as many offensive weapons for Sam Darnold as possible, but Perryman is a realistic swing that I think would make sense if you do have to replace Robbie. Rashard Higgins is someone who I find a little bit intriguing as well from Cleveland. I wouldn't spend a ton of money for him, but again, if you're looking for good value guys and you're not going to be able to sign the premier guy at every single position, I think Higgins is a worthwhile swing. He really had something with Baker Mayfield in 2018. 2019 took a little bit of a step back when Odell came in. Jarvis Landry got more targets, and obviously Njoku's going to get a lot of targets. So Higgins is an intriguing piece. I think you would absolutely need to look to address in the draft as well if you bring in Higgins, but I wouldn't be opposed to bringing him in. This next guy, I'm really a big fan of his game as well, Demarcus Robinson, coming from the Kansas City Chiefs. He is way down on their depth chart, but he was still extremely productive when he did get some targets. I think he still had over 400 yards and I think 2 touchdowns this past year. When you look at that team, they have Travis Kelce that you're throwing to. They have Tyreek Hill. They have Sammy Watkins, Hardman, who they just drafted. There is a ton of names that is going to get the ball from Patrick Mahomes. And still, this guy was able to get productive when he was on the field. I think he averaged 14 yards per reception this past year. He's good. I think he is definitely someone who is an intriguing piece. I think you can get him for something like $5 million a year against the cap. So that's not going to cost you a whole lot. So I would do it. I think I would do it for sure for Demarcus Robinson. And then the last guy on my list that I want to talk about is Nelson Aguilar. I'm going to say no. He was definitely a bust for the Philadelphia Eagles. Didn't really play to the potential that they thought he was going to get when they took him in the first round, I believe, in the late 20s. And I'm almost positive Nelson Aguilar was a first-round pick. He just never really worked out for them, and they're going to move on from him, and I don't think the Jets should look to pick him up. I know that I pretty much put his name in here because of the Eagles' connection with Joe Douglas, but I don't think he brings in Aguilar. I really don't. Let's move over to the edge position. So Jadeveon Clowney. Oh, he's a big-name guy. First overall pick from 2014. I would not touch him with a 10-foot pole. I can't stand this guy at all. He is completely overrated. He has never had double-digit sacks once in his entire career. And he played on the opposite side of J.J. Watt. So think about how many times J.J. Watt was getting double-teamed, and Jadeveon Clowney couldn't break 10 sacks once in his career. His career high was 9.5. He takes plays off, and he's going to get $20 million a year. Between 18 at the absolute lowest and $20 million. Maybe even over $20 million a year, which is insane to me. I would not touch him. No, absolutely not for Jadeveon Clowney. Next up is Dante Fowler Jr., someone the Jets have been trying to acquire for a few years now. Yeah, I'd bring him in. He's going to cost a lot less. He's probably going to be around $13 to $15 million a year if I had to bet. And he is very productive, 11.5 sacks. I think if you put him on the other side of Jordan Jenkins, he could really be that edge presence the Jets haven't had since John Abraham. And you really need speed. They need speed on the defensive side of the ball. That's one of the things they're missing, especially at the outside linebacker position. And Fowler, I think, would fill that need for sure. Yeah, give me Dante Fowler. Zeke Ansah, I'm going to say no. He is just too old and too injury prone. Robert Quinn is a name that I find pretty interesting. He's a little bit on the older side. I think he's 20. He just played his age 29 season, so he's going to be 30 this year, which usually I don't like bringing in guys over 30 years old. It's risky. But I think he still has a little bit left in the tank, and I'd be willing to bring him in. He had double-digit sacks last year for the Cowboys. He played on the opposite side of DeMarcus Lawrence, obviously, but Quinn is someone I would definitely bring in and put on the other side of Jenkins. I think that makes a lot of sense. These next two guys are just too old. Cameron Wake, no. Terrell Suggs, no. Bruce Irvin is another old guy, no. Marcus Golden, I mean, he's basically Jordan Jenkins light. I want no part of him. I don't think he's all that good, unfortunately. I know he's one of the Giants' premier, using premier in air quotes, because I don't think he's really a pass rusher. I just don't. He's an okay player, but he's not anything really to write home about. I'm going to say no on Marcus Golden. And the last guy on the edge rusher position that I want to talk about that I would take a swing on is Vic Beasley. I don't think he's going to cost you a whole lot. He's probably going to get a 1-year prove-it deal, and I think you could probably get him for like $7 million. Yes, he hasn't been as productive as expected the last few years. He had a huge 2016 season. I think he had like 15.5 sacks or something crazy. I would take a swing on it, though, because like I said, it's not going to cost you a whole lot of money, and I'm not trying to necessarily allocate a ton of capital in the cap to the defensive side of the football because they were good enough last year without some of their better players in C.J. Mosley, in Avery Williamson, with a no-name cast of guys at cornerback. I think you get by with almost and essentially the same thing, and getting Mosley back, obviously. I'm assuming he's going to be healthy in 2020. I would take a swing on Vic Beasley. I really would. 1 year deal at $7 million. I think that's the move. Out of all the guys listed, I think that'd be my preferred option, actually. At the cornerback position, Xavier Rhodes, who was just released, no, absolutely not. He is cooked. He's toasted. He's done. He made the Pro Bowl somehow, some way this past year, which just shows how much of a joke the Pro Bowl is. He was atrocious. Chris Harris, I'm going to say no. He's more of a slot corner, and I would prefer to bring back Brian Poole, who is younger and at this point in his career maybe even better than what Chris Harris is. Ronald Darby, I'm going to say yes. I'm going to bring in Ronald Darby. I think it would be a worthwhile swing. He's not going to cost you a whole lot of money. He's okay, and he has that connection with the Philadelphia Eagles and Joe Douglas. Same thing for the next guy on my list, Jalen Mills. Yes, I would bring Jalen Mills in. I think I'd rather Jalen Mills over Ronald Darby, which if you asked me this a year ago, I probably would have said the inverse of that. Mills is good when healthy, but I would take a swing on it. I know I'm kind of contradicting myself a little bit, but I like both Darby and Mills. I think I would take a mid-level swing. They're not going to cost you a whole lot of money. I think you're looking at maybe $5, $6, $7 million a year to bring one of those guys in. It's not going to be like $15+ million. So, yeah, I would bring in Jalen Mills or Ronald Darby for sure. Byron Jones, I originally wrote down yes, but I'm going to switch this to no. I don't think I want to pay him $18 million a year because I think that's what it's going to take. And I don't know if the value is quite there. And maybe I'm a little bit scared because of Tremaine Johnson, which is not the best, I guess, way to look at it because, every case is individual. It's not so much as, oh, well, this other big name cornerback that you just got burned on a couple years ago signing. Now you can't do it again. I just don't know. I think Byron Jones is going to Philly or the Giants. I would lean towards Philly, but I don't think the Jets are going to end up getting him, so I'll say no. James Bradberry, I will say yes. His market, they're saying, is going to be $15 million. I don't think it gets that high. I really don't. Am I crazy for saying that? I think you're going to look at like $13 million a year for Bradberry, which I think is worth it at that point. If you pair him with, obviously, you bring back Brian Poole, I think that would make a lot of sense. And then bless on Austin, who you're not going to pay anything to for the next 3 years or so. So, yeah, I think I'd bring in James Bradberry. Jonathan Joseph, no, too old. Same thing with Aqib Talib at this point in his career, too old. And Eli Apple, he's a head case and his mom's nuts, so I don't want any part of Eli Apple either. That's pretty much the main positions I think the Jets are going to look to attack, and that's my free agency preview in the sense of some names that I think we're going to see come out later today with the New York Jets. I would be very surprised. I don't think they're going to be in the tight end market. They already have 2 guys locked up there. Quarterback, they're going to sign a depth level quarterback on day 1. I'd be very surprised. I can't really think of another position that the Jets are going to be in other than offensive lineman, corner, edge, and wide receiver. That's it. Those are really the 4 positions the Jets have to attack in free agency, and I think we saw that. All right, now it's time for the voicemails, which is always one of my favorite things that we do every week on Just Jets. So we're going to start out in Ohio from Travis, and he wants to talk about the NFL draft. Let's hear from Travis.
Hey, Matt. It's Travis from Ohio, longtime listener. First-time caller. Thanks for taking my call. I think there's going to be a lot of trade-ups for quarterbacks.
I can see it.
And I think Joe Douglas would be open to trading back. I want to get your thoughts on that, especially coming from Baltimore, under that awesome GM over there. Anyway, I could see him doing that, and also I could see some really good offensive linemen falling to us at 11. What would be the best thing or best outcome that you could foresee where you could do another cartwheel on camera for us, your loyal listeners? That would be a thing of beauty, again, to see, just like the Williams trade. So, anyway, go Jets. Love the show. Keep it up, man. Bye.
I certainly appreciate the question, Travis, and I love the car wheels. When the Jets make me happy like that Williams trade, I'll do it again for sure. How about this? I'll say this. If later today, 2 things the New York Jets have to do, and I would do a car wheel on camera. If the New York Jets sign Joe Thuney and bring back Robbie Anderson, I will do a cartwheel on camera. and put it in there. 100%. You can count on that. So let's get to the other part of the question with trading back. I'm not opposed to trading back. I'm really not. Depending on what you do in free agency, I think you can move back. I really do believe that teams always trade up for quarterback. Someone's going to overdraft Jordan Love. Someone might overdraft Jacob Eason. Maybe Justin Herbert starts to fall a little bit. I think you could definitely count on Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa going in the top 5 for sure. No matter where they go. I'm going to assume it's going to be first overall and then to the Dolphins, even if they have to move up from 5. I think that somebody's going to have to move up. And the Jets could be one of those teams moving back. And it's something they almost never do, but I wouldn't be opposed to it. I really wouldn't. It all depends on how the board breaks, too. It's hard to sit here and say in March if I would 100% do it. Because if one of the offensive line, the big 4 offensive linemen are there at 11, and you get a call and say move back, it depends on what the package is and which one of those offensive linemen are there. If Becton's the only one left, then maybe I'm moving back. I think I like Wills and Wirfs the best, so if one of those 2 guys are on the board, then I'm probably not moving back. But it's definitely intriguing, and I'm usually a fan of moving back and getting more picks. So it kind of, I know I didn't give you a real answer, Travis, but I wouldn't be opposed to it. I really wouldn't be opposed to the idea. I don't hate it. All right, so let's go to Joe. I believe it came up as John in the translation, but when I listened to the voicemail before, it sounded like Joe. So I apologize. I'm going to go with Joe based on the voicemail recording. So let's take a listen. He wants to talk NFL draft. It's a little bit of a longer question, but stick with us.
Hey, man, how's it going, man? I love your show. My name's Joe. I'm calling from the city, New York. I'm a fan of yours. I like what you're doing here. Long life, suffering Jets fan like yourself.
Yep.
What do you think about this scenario, right, in regards to the draft? Let's just say that tackles are gone for the most part when we come up to 11, our draft selection time comes, and we decide that we get a chance to fall back in the draft a couple spots.
We just talked about
it. 5, 6 spots. Get another 2 or a 3 or a 2 and a 3. Somebody that wants Judy or Lamb or one of the quarterbacks. Let's say we end up at that spot and we have the opportunity to draft Ruggs in that position, or we got a decent tackle that's left, Josh Jones or Andrew. I know maybe somebody that a second tier lineman, and we get some extra draft compensation from whoever wants to come up and get a quarterback. Maybe we can get an extra corner. I think that'd be like a dream scenario for the Jets. And all the times that McCagnon was in the draft, he never really did a lot of that fall back in the upper rounds. I think that Joe Douglas is a lot smarter, and he knows how to get the most out of what he's got. His resume kind of stands for itself. So I don't know. Just wanted to see what you thought of that. And yeah, man, keep up what you're doing. I'm a fan for sure.
Thank you so much for your question. We kind of just talked about it, but I'm not opposed to the idea, and apparently you, the listener, aren't as well. And it makes sense for the New York Jets to move back because they're a team with a lot of needs, so you could acquire more picks and more picks in the first 2 rounds, which is more likely to hit on. And I would love Henry Ruggs on this team. I think that'd be a lot of fun if you move him back. I wouldn't take him at 11, but if you move back, like he said, maybe 5 or 6 picks and take him in the late teens, before Philly gets on the board, I think they're 21, then yeah, I would do that for sure. Or even if you move back and you take Jones, the tackle, I always mix up his names, Josh Jones, or I always want to say Josh Jacobs or something like that. But regardless, I always mix that up. I know that's on me. I wouldn't be opposed to that either. It all depends on how the board breaks, but under that scenario that, let's say the 4 offensive tackles are gone, then yeah, I'm moving back. If all 4 guys are gone, yeah, I'll move back 100%. I think that makes a lot of sense. Next up, we're going to go to Matt from Cali, and he's going to talk a little bit about Trent Williams. Let's hear from him.
Matt O'Leary, this is Matt Kelly from Yuba City, California, and I'm a diehard Jets fan my whole life, and yeah, it's been a crazy ride, but do you think we got a good chance at getting Williams? And if so, how you feel about next year's first round for him instead of this year's first round? Do you think that could happen? Let me know. All right. Have a good one.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to take a first-round pick anymore to get Trent Williams. I know that was the asking price last year, but that's really gone down. Supposedly they want a second, and that's negotiable. I think you could. I think honestly, a team's going to get him for a third-round pick, and it all depends on what happens later today. But I wouldn't be for a third rounder. Maybe you do it. I would prefer though to bring in a cheaper option to play right tackle or left tackle, even if it's a Beachum, and then draft somebody at 11. I think that's my preferred plan, but I don't think it's going to take a first in either this year or next year. I think you're looking at a third round pick in order to trade for Trent Williams, which value wise isn't awful. It's not my preferred plan. Would I be okay with it? Yes, for a third rounder. Not my preferred plan. But you got to get creative if you're Joe Douglas. You can't just go traditional where I'm just going to keep all my draft picks, not going to move any around, and sometimes you got to take swings. And that would certainly be a big swing. Not opposed to it, but there's definitely some preferred routes. This next one, I'm sorry, you didn't leave me your name. I don't know your name, but thank you so much for calling in, to, Mr. Unknown. And we're going to talk about left tackle.
Matt O'Leary, God bless you. So glad I can be a part of your show. Long story short, you have to draft a legitimate young left tackle. You cannot get a Williams. You have to get a young, legitimate left tackle to protect Donald. Thank you. I'll hear your comment after the show.
Yeah, I'm kind of along the lines of what Mr. Unknown is saying here. I would prefer to get, again, either Mekhi Becton, Andrew Thomas, Tristan Wirfs, Jedrick Wills, one of those four guys in the NFL draft. I think that's your dream scenario. Trent Williams is risky. He hasn't played an entire year. You're going to have to give up a draft asset to get him on the team and then extend him as he's only on or under contract, for one more year. So I think I'm agreeing with you guys in the sense of drafting a tackle is probably the best move. And last but certainly not least, we're going to go to Paul from Virginia. And I love this question because he's talking about, it's a little different. It's different than what we've been talking about on this show, which has been NFL draft or left tackle so far, or free agency earlier on. He's talking about transitioning to a 4-3 defense. So we're getting into a little technical stuff on the defensive side of the ball. Let's hear from Paul.
Hey, Matt. The name's Paul Teifer. I've been a Jets fan for about 20 years now, and I'm calling out of Northern Virginia. My question, even though it doesn't regard free agency, it's really about our defensive side of the football. And with our surplus at middle linebacker, I was wondering what your thoughts would be about us switching back to a 4-3 defense. I know that's talk that's kind of gone out the window here recently, but, me personally, I look back at the heyday Jets defenses, and outside of Rex Ryan running the 46, we've pretty much always been a 4-3 defense, and I'm looking at all our interior defensive linemen that I think would benefit from switching over to a 4-3. Anyway, love to hear your thoughts on it. Thanks for the question. Bye.
Yeah, I love this. I'm nerding out over this because I love talking about 3-4 versus 4-3 or 46. I've always been a guy who has preferred the 4-3 defense over a 3-4 defense. I'm not exactly sure why. I just think 4-3 defenses are more likely to get to the quarterback. And I actually think it would be more beneficial to the New York Jets if they started to run a 4-3 defense. Like he said, they have so many interior defensive linemen that you could work with. Henry Anderson's one. Quinnen Williams is one, big name guy. Folu Fatukasi came on really strong. Nathan Shepard came on really strong. I wouldn't be opposed to it. I really wouldn't. And yeah, maybe they don't have that sexy guy coming off the edge. But, if you bring in Robert Quinn and then Henry Anderson on the other side and Quinnen Williams and Nathan Shepard in the middle with C.J. Mosley as one of your linebackers, and you could probably move on from Avery Williamson at that point. I would think so anyway. And then Jordan Jenkins and Blake Cashman maybe, or Neville Hewitt or Burgess. I think the strength of this team is more with their linemen. So I'd rather more linemen on the field than linebackers, which I know is crazy because you are paying C.J. Mosley a ton of money and you're paying Avery Williamson a ton of money. But I really would like to move on from Avery Williamson. It's not because I don't think he is a good football player. I just would rather take that money and spend it elsewhere. And I'm again, it's just based on my personal preference as well. I prefer 4-3 defenses. Greg Williams is more of a 4-3 defense guy than a 3-4 anyway. He was kind of just running it because that's what the Jets were going to do, and that's what they believed they had the personnel for. I think you have to mix it up a little bit. I don't think you could pigeonhole yourself into a 4-3. Anyway, a lot of times now you have 3 corners on the field anyway, so maybe it's more of a 4-2 with 3 corners. Wouldn't be opposed to that either. If it was C.J. Mosley and Jordan Jenkins as your 2 linebackers with 4 defensive linemen, I think you probably have a better shot at getting to the quarterback that way. Because yes, in a 3-4 defense, you could kind of disguise which 4 are coming or if you're going to blitz, but I think the Jets would be more likely to get pressure actually in a more standard 4-3. So really like this question, Paul. I think that's a good way to end this show this week. I can't wait to get after it next week. It's going to be a reaction to free agency, the big names signed. I'm going to try and get an interview back. This week, I didn't want to do an interview just because I thought it'd be better if I just went over and talked about my expectations for free agency later today and throughout this week. Again, I just want to say, make sure you guys stay safe. Wash your hands. Use hand sanitizer. Be mindful when you're going out. If you don't have to go out, don't. Stay home. Watch the NFL Network. I know there's no sports on right now, but find some things to do. And the self-quarantine is probably not a bad idea. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure, I'm going to tell you one more time, one more plug. Live streaming during free agency later today, so make sure to tune in for that. Thank you so much for tuning in to Just Jets, episode number 5. I'm Matt O'Leary. I'll talk to you next time.